Well, good morning, everybody. We're on day 6, story 6 of residential school genocide. Every day from now till June 28th, 2022, the day of children's genocide and armed conflict, we are going to keep telling stories. First Nations people love stories. Every single day that I give a story, I'm going to relate it to current events that are happening right now worldwide and domestically. This is no exception. Today, in the last 24 hours, massive news stories. We watched Justin Trudeau go before the European Parliament, where he was criticized for a number of MEP, which are members of European Parliament. Many nations in the European Union, they dwarf Canada considerably. Canada is not a member of the European Union. They have no business there. Justin Trudeau had no business going there except to showboat. We've watched Twitter explode. We've watched social media explode. All these Canadians, oh, Justin Trudeau, the hero. Everybody is so angry from the left. Why is media not publishing Trudeau's miraculous speech? He gave a great speech. And then there's George Soros. Biological labs. Russia's account that George Soros, along with Hunter Biden, a powerful pack in the United States of America, funded and run by George Soros, Joe Biden's extreme ultra-left lunatics. And then we see there's right lunatics giving a completely false narrative. Two crazy narratives set to dismantle any real analysis and real history of what is going on. I am going to, for the first time that I've ever seen or heard, go through George Soros, hedge money master, hedge funds, what it means to the common man. The theme song I played for all of you today, I'm going to now play that every single residential school genocide story day. You're going to hear that theme song. I'm not going to tell people what that theme song is or where it comes from, except for it is binding in this world. It was drafted, written in Cincinnati in 1942. Ladies and gentlemen, this is crafted by America post the Atlantic Charter of 1941 and the deal struck by the United States of America, Russia, which was the USSR, and the United Kingdom. Americans wrote this song. This rendition I provide to you is all about the common man and women working every day of their lives in their public institutions for their financial system, your public bank, and what George Soros does in his hedge monies to destroy you, the common man and woman. What his real history is, how it relates to First Peoples and residential school genocide. We're going to go through the claims by Russia that George Soros, the U.S. government, specifically to Hunter Biden under Joe Biden, has been operating biolabs in Ukraine, the kind of biolabs that can be traced only in this world to not only the United Kingdom, folks, but all radical colonial countries pre-1939, meaning World War II, the colonial wars. This was Axis and ally colonial governments, meaning monarchies. Did you all know that Hungary, loyal neo-nationalist Hungary, loyal Nazi Hungary of the time, during George Soros' time, was also too a constitutional monarchy? You will find, rinse and repeat, the greatest atrocities committed in this world. These wealthy oligarchs all hail from constitutional monarchies. And let me explain George Soros for the first time, and then we relate everything to absolutely residential school genocide. A period that takes us, everybody, to the United States of America, specifically the northern states, at the time occupied by France, long before what would become the 13 colonies, when the common man was subjected in North America to absolute colonial atrocity and abuse. The beginning, everybody, of biological warfare. You will find that every colonial country participated in genocide through biological warfare, and the first peoples are the first experiment. We're going to go through that entire history today. We're leaving out Black Lives Matter in the southern states and slavery to move on to genocide, where they didn't want the slaves. They wanted the first peoples to be exterminated. And they went about that in a devious, sick, and perverted way. Real history that is rewritten in the United States of America for the absolute benefit of crown colonials. George Soros was not a Nazi. He was not. Hungary was a sympathizer with Nazi Germany and absolute colonial powers because it was a monarchy. That's the truth. George Soros is a lover of monarchies and a lover of hedge fund systems. In fact, he's a genius at raping the common man. Everything that is America, the equality of the human being, cemented in 1941, right here in Atlantic Canada. It was done in 1941. It's been rewritten by one Joe Biden and absolutely Boris Johnson, who is the sitting president for the Charter of the Commonwealth of Nations. He is the sitting president for the benefit of the royal family. This is supposedly illegal. Nobody's saying anything about it. But we're going to go through Russia's claims in Ukraine of George Soros funding Hunter Biden and absolutely biological warfare labs in Ukraine, what Russia is saying and what is truthful about George Soros and what isn't. Because we get an alt-right narrative completely fabricated, and then we get an alt-left narrative as equally fantastic and fake. It's not the truth. Today I'm going to give you the truth, simple economics, and then we're going to go through biological warfare in its real history, where it comes from, who started it, who was first susceptible to it, where that is in the world, and why. So it all begins with the English language. I want everybody to understand modern English. Modern English in the world today was first published in the 1500 year by one William Shakespeare, allowed to happen by the crown. Remember, folks, in real history, the Dark Ages are called dark because illiteracy was huge. You weren't allowed to speak English. In fact, it was French. Old English and French before that, not our language today, folks. Not even close. Not even close. It took the majesty of the British Empire to allow English to be brought forward, published, written, printed. The modern English language is only 500 years old, folks. Which goes through now to where we're going to get to. We're going to go to the 1600s for the Huron people of North America and what would be Canada, all in the Great Lakes. This is smallpox and French ruling parts that went all the way down to what is now Louisiana. This is an overlap, absolutely, of the Canadian First Peoples and absolutely the American Indian. All one peoples at the time. They had the Iroquois Confederacy. This is what transferred over to North Americans and what would be Canada. Smallpox brought by the French contaminated blankets from overseas to infect and murder all the Huron people, kill as many indigenous people as possible. That is the first biological warfare, again completed by a European constitutional monarchy. I'm sorry, folks. That is the truth. You can't find any experts to remove that. It keeps going in history, same area but spread out as borders became defined, as the 13 colonies broke away from the British Empire. We get into polio, what was done in northern states and absolutely widespread across Canada in what were residential schools. Taking from the British in biological warfare, they would take Indian children, American Indian children, in the northern states, folks. So don't look south for answers here, because there are 5 colonial powers that devastated the United States of America, fought all the American, Canadian Indians, the one peoples, as well as all the breakaway independent peoples of America that would become the 50 states. History is wrong. No one ever looks at the northern state travesty. Black Lives Matter ignores all this too. They want a different narrative. We can only look at history as it really is. So what happened in residential schools? Largely in Canada, largely in the northern states of the United States of America on the eastern seaboard, which was British Quebec before that. And during that period, folks, during that period, there is the British settlers who absolutely infected with polio blankets administered out to the First Peoples, both Canada and both the American Indian, all one peoples but divided by a border. That was done. Nobody can dispute that. That is logged history, written, exposed, and done unanimously. The UK won't even say that that's not true because they know it is. They have it. They've even published it themselves. You can read it on history. You can read it through BBC. You can read it through Britannica. That's the truth. First biological warfare was all by the colonial countries, the countries that participated in absolute genocidal colonialism. All monarchies, folks. All monarchies. George Soros is not a German Nazi. Hungary was sympathetic, but Hungary was crown colonial too. You'll find Russia's Georgia of the time period, crown colonial too. People don't like these history lessons. George Soros takes hedge monies. What are hedge monies? I'm going to give you the basic definition. Hedge monies are investing against a central bank in very, very quick assets. Assets that are not physical. These are your credit institutions, credit cards, lease assets, meaning nobody owns a physical asset, but they're contracts to rent or lease something out. the holder of a contract to lease an asset from somebody else. They are making money on that. Public banks insure all these companies and organizations. That means you, the common Joe Jane. In every country, that is the function of a central bank, a pooling of all the working citizens, because I promise you folks, anywhere you go in the world, all major source of wealth, absolute wealth, comes from people in businesses of resource and wealth creation. We call that the primary sector, that grows weaker and weaker and weaker with each and every passing world administration in this world today. It only gets weaker. Public sector, service sector continues to expand and grow, which does not generate wealth. It generates generally 1/10 of the tax revenue that you get from the primary sector, because it's recirculated primary sector money that funds that. And when you can't fund that, you get people like George Soros, who gets involved with hedge funds and turns around and convinces governments to use the public bank, that's the people's bank, to make loans and deals, to strengthen their political positions, to strengthen service and public sector on the same hedge managers' recommendations. So the country's politicians do that. And then what happens? Well, it's insured by you, the people. So the wealthy George Soros turns around, and then he liquidates after convincing the government to follow his recommendations. He turns around and sells off at a rapid pace, dropping the currency, the value of the common Joe Jane, who must insure the funds, the monies. The dollar value drops because he sold first. Everybody starts selling in a panic. And then he waits before the day closes. And as the money value drops to the lowest point, he turns around and buys it all back at a much, much lower value. He makes a tremendous amount of money. Then the money goes steadily back up, may not be to its original position. But what does that do to the common Joe Janes? Pensions, asset values, your loan values. You lose incredible amounts of money. In fact, you can literally bankrupt a country. And then taxpayers must pay it back. They're on the hook for the wealth transfer, which was wealth created by citizens transferred to people like George Soros, who orchestrated the whole scam. He's done it in 15 countries. Who else has done this kind of tactic? Well, absolutely all the colonials, time and time again. They devalue people, they uneducate people, the public, and keep them under class rule. They don't want a middle class. They want an upper crust of the few and all of you down here in servitude. That is the staple of all monarchies and crown colonial systems. George Soros is a neo-national, a post-national state guy. He doesn't like the UN. He is from a period of the League of Nations. He's from a time of age of empires, specifically colonial empires. Germany is only one of 7, folks. They committed horrific atrocities, as does and has had all colonial empires. The idea that Soros and Hunter Biden, through his daddy, Joe Biden, funding Ukrainian biolabs is very critical, very likely real. I await to see what Russia produces. These are serious claims that are backed up in clear history. We know that constitutional monarchies, these commonwealths, not equality of the man, as the song that I let off here from 1942, created in the United States of America, a rendition from the Marine Corps. The U.S. Marine Corps made this rendition a year ago. So I guess if Joe Biden wants the video taken down or silenced, that's what's going to happen. But it doesn't change reality of the common man versus the commonwealth. These are two distinctly different things. In the commonwealth, the savage Indian can't exist. The savage Indian has been victim of biological warfare, the world's first seen biological warfares. Again, orchestrated and committed absolutely by a constitutional monarchy of a colonial country. They all are. They all are. You will find this history. It's about inequality of the person, not equality of the person, which is a staple of America and the Russian Federation. Switzerland, there's a number of countries who participate in a federalism, but then there's a number of them stuck with the crown that absolutely overrides federalism, like Canada. It's the illusion of a federalism, but it's not really true. When we go through residential school genocide, in all its years, up to just a very few years ago, we see experiments on residential school children taken and put into military complexes from those schools to be experimented on. Not unlike what they did to handicaps, deaf people, and homosexuals. This has been done all over the Commonwealth. It's been done in all colonial nations, but Britain is one of the worst, one of the brutalist. First ever inception of chemical and biological warfare. UK, Germany, Japan, all of them did it. Now, USA and Russia, since World War II, have crafted the most chemical and biological weapons. So many, in fact, the entire world of colonials and every country in the world fits into a little jar of sand, a small teaspoon of sand, against Russia and USA's giant jar of sand of biological and chemical weapon creation. They're all over the world. They've made many labs. They've made many of these facilities. Have they utilized them? No. There have been accidents from both countries or tests. Sure there have been, and they're published, they're credible, they're real. Why did they get there? And how are they able to grow those industries so well? Well, that's federalism, like everything else that's USA and USSR. They are tremendously powerful because they've organized into federalism, just like the Iroquois Confederacy, Switzerland's federalism. They're a mesh amalgamation. But that is not George Soros or any of the Commonwealth countries or any countries in monarchical systems. Unitary systems are another problem, especially with vast distances or multiple cultural, ethnic, and religious organizations and denominations, where you see a divide amongst peoples. In those systems, those people always end up a minority over a majority, removal of all those protected human rights according to the UN Charter 1945. Polio, when residential school genocide was occurring, even up to modern times, we can look back in the 50s. Do you know what happened to an Indian residential school child who refused sexual advances or got caught speaking their language? They could be locked away in a polio ward where they were certain to be infected with polio. and they were certain to die. Did you know Canadians, more so than American Indians, by a tremendously large margin? In fact, this kind of genocidal margin blows the ICC right open, the International Criminal Court. It should be put forward. It should be just on the polio genocide alone. Hear me out. Out of 100,000 children, ratio, 4,000 residential Indian school children died of polio. 4,000 for every 100,000 students, or 4% of the school population. Do you know what the polio statistics were for everywhere else in Canada? 200 in 100,000. How is it more than 2,000% increase in polio deaths for residential school Indian children? In modern history, we're not talking 100 years ago, folks. We're talking about this century, administered by biological warfare systems taught to the Canadian government by the British Empire, because they did it too, all over the world. This is not fiction. This is published reality, not made available. Not made available. Media shies away from it. The American Indian, besides the British Quebec states that overlapped against the 13 colonies, that's where you see the genocide, and it starts to subside after 1924, America First. That was the end of the American Indian Wars, and the federal government took 5 decades to end it all absolutely, and by 1975, none of those practices were allowed to continue. It's one thing to make a law. It's good Richard Nixon made the law. It's another thing to see it enforced, and it was. That's the difference here, folks. America has a constitution capable of fixing itself, because fundamentally, as my new theme song that I'm going to play, as long as that continues, and I don't know if Justin Trudeau and his radical left lunatics are going to have it removed. I don't know. I don't see how, unless the U.S. Marine Corps has me banned, I don't see how that's going to end. And realistically, that was for a president, and it would have to be his notion. I've tagged the presidents of the United States, the last two in this video, Fox News, CNN. It's their choice. We can tell lies, we can write fake histories, we can lie about George Soros from the lunatic left, or we can lie about him from the radical right. Here I am, for all of you, in residential school genocide, telling you the real history. Now, Russia might be lying. I don't know, folks. I got to see the evidence. Those are huge claims about Soros. But I have to see the evidence. I'm just telling you what is George Soros as it really is. And you'll find he's a lover of class structure, which has a savage human being always attached to it from constitutional monarchies. It's how they generate their wealth. It's why the Jewish Holocaust happened. No other reason, folks. Indian genocide, no other reason but those monarchical systems. First, second, third class. And if you won't work as a slave, then you will be labeled a savage for eradication. That is a staple of all the colonial powers. Eradication, or we will rape you into society, meaning we will send the military in to kill all your men, and we will follow with our forced sexual attack to impregnate the remaining women and breed you into society that we will force upon you until we have eradicated all your customs, traditions, language, social, economic systems. That's a staple of all of the colonial countries. Germany was late in the game. They didn't invent anything. It was all invented from those prior to them. There are 7 colonials, and we will go through this every day from now till June 28th, 2022. Everything I share with you is clear, credible, verifiable, and you can't find any academics worldwide to come forward and dispute what I'm telling you and what I share with you in each and every story. Biological warfare, France and Britain committed to that long before anybody else officially and logged to the American and the Canadian Indian. That's absolute. Hundreds of years of it. World War II, World War I, you can clearly see chemical and biological systems in place and experimentation with savages all over those colonial occupied countries. For those savages, those deemed savage, who would not let those empires take away their religion, their culture, their language, their land, who they are. That's the truth. There's no other narrative, folks. We can call it Nazi, we can call it neo-nationalism. The reality is it is always tied to colonial countries of monarchical systems where human beings are gods over the common Joe Jane, the average citizen. Thank you. That's my story today. Please share. Learn your truth. Look at it by the numbers. By all accounts, at 4%, the UNSC alone must act on that. But they say, hey, look, too much of it overlaps before World War II, before even 1941's Atlantic Charter. And now Joe Biden and Boris Johnson signed a new Atlantic Charter. They ripped up everything and they're going to war with Russia because it's a good idea to destroy another federalist country so that way the only remaining powerhouse federalism is the United States of America. And folks, Americans, doesn't matter if you're Democrat, Republican, if you think Russia falling and tearing apart into 84 regions is a great thing, USA is next. USA will be next. You will have no other federalism of real merit to defend you against. You are literally once again going to be facing the entire world. And if you didn't know, you know now that 75% of the world is civil law, socialist, in unitary or crown colonial state. It was a job for Russia and USA. They're nuclear powers. They said never again. They made a promise to the world. And they've wasted many decades going at each other full bore. Produced monumental amount of weapons beyond anybody ever seen in the world. A massive, masterful federalism. I'm sorry, I don't see Russia going down the toilet no matter what sanctions are put on them. They talk about energy and, oh, you won't get that reliance. Folks, look at value and supply chains. I am an economist. That is my graduation. That's what I pursued in school. And I'm going to tell you, look at vaccinations by the P5 and 2 other countries. But the reality is those supply and value chains are the tail of the tape. Russia's not going anywhere. Not at a rate of 7-1 for the domestic Russian, regardless of how people want to state or claims made by Joe Biden, who's clearly got ties to biological labs in Ukraine that could be at a level 4. We don't know. I need to see the evidence. But if you're a betting man or woman, folks, USA and Russia have more chemical and biological weapons manufactured than all the countries in the world. To blindly walk forward saying, oh, no, it's not real, it couldn't be. No, they would never do that. History says, oh, yes, they would, and they did. I'm sorry. Both those countries. And the colonials are the ones who made that happen. The question is, why do USA and Russia build these systems at monumental pace against each other? Who is crafting that? Who wants to see Russia and America destroy each other? Two federalisms destroyed means Unitarianism and crown colonialism once again for the whole world, which is Nazi, which is neo-nationalist, which is post-national state, which is class structure, middle class. Go look at your colonial history. Go look at the Dark Ages, Age of Empires. I'm sorry, folks. History says that system will be the death of you and your children in the future. A system much, much worse than what we experience now because it's still alive and vibrant. Again, Canada leads this charge. 40 million Canadians fund it per person per capita more than anyone else by a large margin worldwide. Third number one funder of it. We are just as funded as India, 1.4 million people. That's your Commonwealth. Folks, that's my video. Learn your history. Learn the truth. That's reality. Learn the northern states. How did they get there? How did America end that? We can't keep saying, oh, America's to blame for everything. That's the country state today, starting with 13 colonies. 5 colonial powers are guilty of all the atrocities of America against the American Indian. It took federalism a long time from the Iroquois Confederacy to set the stage. You can thank the Founding Fathers that so much was written right in America. It took a lot. Learn your history as it really is. Learn George Soros as he really is. Is he against the common folk? Of course he is. He's a lover of crown colonialism. Look at the history of Hungary. We can't keep just worrying about Germany. I know that sets alarm bells, but we need to look at the whole picture. What is the root cause of it? What creates that mentality? What makes the radical right? What makes the radical left? Where do we get these fake narratives from? The Bank of England? The royal family? The rest of them? Did the UK politicians in the royal family suffer from what George Soros did in 1992 to the UK and the Bank of England? No, they didn't. The people of UK, the average Joe Jane, because there is no equality of person in the UK. There's only equality of the person in USA and Russia, regardless of how people feel about two-party systems or one-party federal system. Regardless of how you feel about that, how does a country govern itself? Well, federalism gives an equality of person, because how come all those different cultures, customs, religions, so many, in fact, many more than the United States, how do they, in such grand differences across such a large, vast area of the former Soviet Union, which is the Russian Federation today, how do they hold it together? How do they work together? Why is Ukraine worse than it's ever been since it left the Soviet Union? It's never gotten any better. The corruption is huge. Why? Why do they never grow and achieve? And they have full access to the seas. They have the allies. They got all this, that. Because it's corruption. It's grand corruption of a grand scale. People don't like to look at numbers. Numbers speak volumes. You can't find any economist throughout the world to tell you Ukraine isn't one of the most corrupt nations in the world. You can't. Not a credible one. You can pay somebody through the Commonwealth, they'll tell you that. They never go on the world stage. They'd never leave their own country. They get paid. They post it in the paid media to tell you a fancy story that isn't true. And when you go against written, published, accredited world stage standards, they'll say, that's all a lie. Here you go. Here's the last 40 years. You tell me. When we look at biological warfare, no peoples has the greatest source of truth in the history of it than the first peoples of Canada and the northern United States, which was British Quebec. It'll scare you, folks. It'll scare you. While the 49th parallel exists today and it's transferred down in the Great Lakes, that wasn't always the way it was. And we can keep lying. We can lie about Spain. We can lie about Britain. We can lie about France. We can lie about Denmark. We can lie about all this colonial history in the United States of America, the Portuguese. We can lie about it, but the atrocities are there, and who had control, who created that system. Regardless of, I can say, well, but USA took a long time. Well, it took a long time to get 50 states, from 13 to 50. But the Constitution by the Founding Fathers, the equality of person, continually redesigns the USA better and better. As long as we, the people, realize their Constitution, live it, love it, know it. Canada, nobody knows their Constitution. No one's by any large margin ever read it. It's not part of your teaching in school because, geez, we can't have Canadians reading the Constitution. A whole bunch of religious folks are going to lose it. Can you imagine Catholic school being trained to the divinity of the crown and your politicians? Imagine going through the first 2/3 of the Canadian Constitution. People would be puking in their chairs. Too many questions would be asked. People would start saying, listen, this system's shit. I want out of it. What about all these atrocities from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission? Oh, well, don't worry. We've got a design. We're going to credit everything by making the slave class pay for it while we continue to genocide the First Peoples. That's what's going to continue. Thank you, everybody. This is Day 6, Story 6, related to current events. Check out biological warfare. Check out what Hungary did, what Ukraine did through colonial systems. Look at the history of it, folks. The equality of the person was drafted in 1941, called the Atlantic Charter. Signed, sealed, certified by Joseph Stalin, Teddy Roosevelt, Sir Winston Churchill, and King George VI. As of this last summer, Joe Biden and Boris Johnson reverted us back to a League of Nations system. They wipe it out and they put in the new Green New Deal that is found exclusively in the Commonwealth Charter of 54 Nations 2012. You'll find Agenda 2021 cemented there, Agenda 2030, all of the Green New Deal. Green New Socialism administered by the Crown. Energy poverty, food scarcity for all of you. That's why you will own nothing. That is a staple of every Crown system ever formed on this earth. All of them. And worse for those Crown colonials who are living it each and every day and laughing at all of you. George Soros was not a real Nazi. There's a lot of fabrication on that. But he is a neo-nationalist. He is absolutely a lover of the Crown. A destroyer of we the people. A destroyer of the common men and women through hedge funds. And absolutely devaluing all of you and making you debt slaves. He transfers your primary sector wealth generation, the work off your backs, and he transfers that to his pocket. He will bankrupt countries who are too democratic. Absolute federalism must be destroyed. He works diligently to destroy federalism. Joe Biden's working to destroy federalism. He is by far the most treacherous, traitorous American president ever elected. From the worst, wildest dreams no founding father could ever imagine back during post-independence, more than 250 years ago. They couldn't imagine somebody campaigning, running for president, getting elected, who is absolutely in with the crown. That is against everything that is America, everything that the founding fathers crafted, and absolutely every American lives by, the Constitution of the United States of America. Completely against it. But unfortunately, the executive power of president allows them to administer foreign policy as they deem and they want through executive orders. Regardless if it's human-based, regardless if it goes against the Constitution of the United States, presidents have full right to do whatever they want. And he's trying. All for people like George Soros, the British royal family, and the list goes on and on and on. We can go on this journey right through all the colonials. Unitary systems, monarchies, either or will do. It's sick, it's depraved, it's wrong. Share because it's the truth. Share because it needs to get out there. Share because First Peoples need to know the history of biological warfare and where it really comes from and who brought it into this world. Thank you. That's my video. Bye now.